In this video, we're going to talk about informal and official notation, which is going to basically explain why. Well, okay, we saw that P arrow Q is not a sentence because it's missing parentheses, and yet we've been treating it as if it was a sentence, and informal notation and official and informal notation is going to help us make sense of that. So, we need parentheses though. Why do we need parentheses at all? We need it to avoid ambiguity. In the previous video, we saw that we need to distinguish between the negation of a conditional and a conditional with a negated antecedent. So we need to distinguish between these two sentences. The first of these, in the first, the antecedent is not P, and that's the negation, and then the whole thing is a conditional. The second is the negation of a conditional. So they're different. They say different things. That's what we saw. We saw that difference in the previous video between if I don't eat a cookie, I'll be happy, and it's not the case that if I do eat a cookie, I'll be happy. And we saw that those said different things, and we want our logical language to distinguish between those two and to do so in a way that's not ambiguous. And so, so the first says that, right, not P is enough for Q, and the second says that P isn't enough for Q, and it's the parentheses that make them do the different things, and they tell us which of the logical symbols is the main connective or the main operator. In the first one, the main operator is the arrow. In the second one, the main operator is the negation, and that's because that's what was added last in building those two sentences. In building the second sentence, we first built the conditional with the parentheses, and then we put the negation on. In building the first sentence, first we took P, put the negation on the front to get not P, and we put not P on the one hand and Q on the other into the conditional. And that means the conditional symbol is added last, making it the main operator and making that sentence a conditional. So that's nice. Okay, we need the parentheses. They tell us, they help to tell us, okay, you know, is one sentence or another a conditional or a negation? And so we can't just remove all the parentheses from our language, otherwise our language would be ambiguous, because we'd have a symbol like this, negation P arrow Q, and this could be either a conditional or a negation, either way, and if our language had no parentheses. Is P negated, or is the whole conditional negated? Who knows? It could be either. And so this thing is not a sentence according to the rules. Only the ones with the parentheses are sentences. But we'd like to not have to write the parentheses all the time like we haven't been doing. So we're not going to, but we need to explain why or how. So with informal notation, we drop parentheses where we don't need them. So this, for example, you don't need parentheses. It's not a sentence of official notation, but we're going to say it is a sentence of informal notation. Informal notation is what we get when we drop parentheses where we don't need them, and we didn't need them. So, but let's be more explicit about what the rules are for dropping parentheses. So first of all, we can drop the final external set of parentheses. So if you build a sentence and you're done, you're entirely done building up the sentence grammatically, you've said, yes, this is the sentence I want to say. If it has parentheses around it, around the rest, if there are parentheses around everything else, then you can drop those. So for example, here we have the conditional negation P arrow Q with parentheses around the whole thing. We can drop them, and then we get this not P arrow Q. So what that means is that not P arrow Q is not officially a sentence, but informally it is a sentence, and it's the sentence that you would. What sentence is it? It's a sentence you get by putting the parentheses back on. So negation P arrow Q, now according to this rule about informal notation, that's a conditional. The negation is inside the parentheses. So if a sentence is missing parentheses, you're going to put them around the whole thing, and that means it's going to be not a negation. It's going to be either a conditional or a conjunction. Our second rule says when you have a conjunction inside of a conditional, you can drop the parentheses from around the conjunction. So, like this. So, let's say we have parenthesis, parenthesis, P and Q, parenthesis, arrow R, parenthesis. Okay, so we can drop the first set of parentheses because they're the final set of parentheses, and we get parenthesis, P and Q, parenthesis, arrow R. And then this new rule says, oh, you have parentheses around a condition, around a conjunction, and the conjunction is inside a conditional. You can drop those too, and so we get just P and Q arrow R. And what that means is if P and Q, then R. The conditional is the main operator. And it's the same if the conjunction is in the consequent. So if we have if P then Q and R, okay, we can drop the first set of parentheses because they're the final set of parentheses. Then giving us that middle sentence, P arrow parenthesis Q and R parenthesis. And then we can drop the parentheses around the Q and R with this second rule, and we have P arrow Q and R. And so if you ever encounter P arrow Q and R, you know, oh, okay, well, that has to be if P, then Q and R. It's a conditional. The conjunction is in the consequent because that's the rule. How could you get to this thing without the parentheses? Only if you started with the conditional and then dropped the parentheses according to these two rules. And then we have our last rule, which says if you have a string of conjunctions and they're grouped to the left like this, we have the parentheses are on the left conjunct, then you can drop them. So first we drop the external pair of parentheses, which gives us parenthesis P and Q parenthesis and R, and then this rule says, okay, if you have a string of conjunctions and you've got the parentheses around the left one, on the left side, then you can drop those two. Okay, so these rules, especially the second and third, will take a little while to just sort of get used to, and that's fine. That's what you'll do. So let's look at then some examples of things that are sentences and things that aren't. So a string of symbols is just some symbols. So P arrow Q is a string, and it's also arrow negation Z is a string. Negation Z arrow Q R parenthesis, that's a string. So we then can sort all strings into three categories. A string of symbols might be a sentence in official notation. That's if we made it by the four rules. Initially, they had all the parentheses. Or the string might be a sentence in informal notation. And what does that mean? It means, well, first you built up a sentence from in official notation, and then using the parentheses dropping rules, you produce the one we actually have. So the thing you actually have is, okay, first we built up a sentence using the rules, and then we got to the sentence the thing we're actually looking at by dropping parentheses. Then that's a sentence in informal notation. And then finally, the string is not well formed, like the ones we just saw, if it's any other string. If you got it if it's not official and it's not informal, then it's not well formed. Okay, so those are the three categories. We'll see some examples of sort of analyzing strings. Are these strings official or informal or not well formed, or aren't they, in our next video.